Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Navigating Change, a Lunch and Learn series. This webinar is part of an 8-part series that is dedicated, or excuse me, designed to provide professionals working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD, with helpful information all during your lunch hour. This series is hosted by the Social Policy Institute. Each webinar is about 45 minutes long, and the speakers for this series will be local professionals who've dedicated their lives and careers to supporting and advocating for those in the IDD community. This series is also part of a larger project that is led by the Social Policy Institute in partnership with the San Diego Regional Center and the Department of Developmental Services, focused on supporting youths who are transitioning into adulthood in the IDD community. I'd like to make a quick plug before we get started for In the Loop, which is a monthly newsletter that is also from the Social Policy Institute that provides highlights about the latest developments affecting individuals with IDD. The newsletter provides insights on federal, state, and local issues and snapshots of key news, policy changes, and pressing issues, all in one centralized place. I'll send the link for that in just a moment, but this newsletter is intended for the intended audience for this newsletter is folks with IDD, their family members, service providers, advocates in this field. Before we get started today, I just wanted to go over some brief housekeeping. As you may notice when you logged in, today's webinar is being recorded. As I said earlier, this is part of an 8-part series. So this is the second one. So the first one is available on the Social Policy Institute's website and available for viewing. And our next one will be available, will be happening in November. If you have any questions for our wonderful speaker today, please go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click the Q&A button. You'll be able to put your questions in there. And I will be back after Moira is done speaking to go through those questions for her and have her answer those. If you have general things that you'd like to say in the chats, comments about how wonderful Moira is, you can put those in the actual chat. If you have any technical issues, please put those in the chat as well, and I will support you with that there. If you'd like to practice using the chat, you can open that up right now and let us know your name, where you're coming from, and the service organization if you're part of one. On a final note today, you will be receiving a follow-up email after today's presentation. We really encourage you to fill out the survey that is attached to that. It helps us to know what topics you may be interested in learning more about, ways we can continue to make sure this Navigating Change webinar series is something of value to you. All right, all housekeeping aside, let's talk a little bit about our speaker today. So Moira Albritton is a program specialist in education and training with the Exceptional Family Resource Center. She's been involved in special education and advocacy for individuals with IDD for over 25 years. Along with her 2 degrees from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, she's a trained mediator, mother of 5, and the spouse of a Navy retiree. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Moira, and I will be back at the end to help support with Q&A. Please enjoy today's webinar.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Thanks very much. Welcome, everyone. I'm just taking a quick peek and seeing that we have some fellow parents. So hello to you. This should be hopefully really talking about something that's very important to everyone here. So it's the what comes next, planning for life after special education. So whether a person is leaving because of a graduation, because they're exiting upon aging out, this is for you. Okay, so I wanted to give you, we're going to have a little tech issue just getting me going, hopefully, and it will start. There we go. So first, just to give you an idea of where we're going during this talk, quick introductions, not so much about me, but mostly just showing off 5 kids. And then we're going to go through 3 issues around transition. So one is the gaps, and we know that there are gaps. And so I'm going to point out a few of those. There's also gotchas, and I'll be defining those mostly as the things that you don't even know to worry about until you talk to me, and then I tell you them. And then lastly, the gems, and that's really the good stuff. There's going to be some practical tips to you If you are a professional, please kind of look for those as the little nuggets to hopefully pass on to families. If you're a family, you're getting them firsthand. And then we have a few resources, not too many, and then some contact information, and then we'll go right into questions. And we should have plenty of time for that, as Jocelyn noted. So first, this is a photo. Obviously, something has changed, and it's not just the color of my hair, the shape of myself, but this is a photo. And as Jocelyn talked about, my husband was active duty Navy, 30-ish years, 30 years, something months. And we got kind of used to taking photos like this, where he wasn't there, I was there. And as you can see, I was surrounded and outnumbered. And so today we are going to talk about these three individuals. One of my personal, I'm going to say pet peeves is when I go to a talk and the person tells me this great story about their child and what happened. And I'm like, oh, but that's not my child. So hopefully we're like multiplying the number, and hopefully one of the children will be a closer match. They all share a couple of diagnoses, and they all went through school with an IEP, and they all are having a pretty decent life right now. And so just to kind of give an idea of like the different trajectories that folks can take as they go through transition and what that might look like. One last note, I do have their permission to share some of their photos and their experiences, their story, their life with you today. So to ground us in how I tend to approach transition, I've done it for four young men. So I'm kind of starting to feel like I might be at least not a learner anymore, like I'm not a novice. So I look at three questions that correspond to three of those ITP goals, the individual transition plan goals that are embedded into the IEP. And so one of them is one around post-secondary employment. And really, I distill that down to how do I contribute to my community? Then I think about post-secondary education, and it's how am I going to keep on learning, especially now that I don't have to. Nobody's telling me I have to be in this space for this number of hours a day, every day with these people. I get to be more selective about what I choose to learn. And then for our folks that have, intellectual and developmental disabilities being served by the regional center, perhaps, one of the questions we look at for that independent living is, with whom do I live? And that's kind of a good way to think about like, what are my support needs going to be going forward at this time? Knowing that all of those things are going to change over time. This is just that snapshot. And then I add one extra question, and that's the one that makes me me. What brings me joy and connection? And just kind of thinking about that touches all three of those outer triangles. And so for adults, you're seeing three outside entities that are hopefully supportively influencing how those questions are answered. And that, of course, is the Department of Developmental Services or Regional Center. It is from the bottom, post-secondary institutions and their disability services. And then the Department of Rehabilitation may be involved through the Individualized Plan for Employment or IPE. So this slide is the one that makes me say transition is a process. If your expectation, if you're a parent watching this, is that, oh, I'm going to check all the boxes and then we're going to put it in a pretty binder and we're going to put a bow around that binder and we're going to admire the binder that we've done. That has not been my experience. And like I said, 4 times, not my experience. So that idea of shifting, changing, adjusting, that is going to be something that we hopefully are embracing. So we're going to start with the gaps. The gaps in, again, you're moving from hopefully IEP, special education, compulsory education kinds of services into the unknown of adult services. So the first gap that I think parents discover is just that the system is fragmented compared to your local education agency. So when that bus stops coming to pick up your loved one, and you're going to hear me say the bus because I really miss the bus. It's that there's no one entity that is a guaranteed provider of services. So each of those institutions, Department of Rehabilitation, Regional Center, post-secondary education, they all have their own rules, their own unique vocabulary, and of course, a unique perception of what their respective roles and responsibilities are. And so that leads to a second gap for our families. And so this is the biggie from the role of mom is like I finally got used to doing IEPs. I finally felt like I was, competent. And then all of a sudden it's like a terrible game of chutes and ladders. I'm at the top and then I slide to the bottom and I'm right back at the bottom of a new learning curve. And it can be a bummer and it can be like a little overwhelming, a little disorienting. And so this is also happening right when families are navigating all sorts of decision points. So I think it's really important to honor that there is a gap. Like everybody's jumping and that gap is sometimes small. Sometimes that gap feels like it's a giant canyon. But that is not only normal, but it is emotional. So another gap, and I'm going to name it even if others might not, and that is support needs do matter. Whether the support needs are health, behavior, communication, or mobility, they tend to dictate what sorts of options become available. Finding the right fit, finding a good match, or even finding a spot anywhere for most of the families will take some patience, will take some research, and then some plain old luck, like asking for a service at the same time that there's a spot, or being prepared to wait for a program to become available. Those are choices that families are having to navigate. I want to give some space for language access. It can be a barrier, and it can be a barrier in a couple of ways. I think most of us in that service, access, and equity profession look at, how do we make sure that families have the information to know about programs and know how to, ask questions and find out more about those services. But I think we can forget that on the back end, even if we make that successful connection, we have to make sure that there's a way for the program to communicate effectively with the family and the person that they're serving. The last one is my favorite, not at all, time and space continuum. And this is just, again, a reminder that we are all human trying to juggle work responsibilities. Often we are caregiving for other minor children or caregiving for an individual with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We may have care responsibilities for elder family members. Sometimes we even have a spouse. So we have these we got to keep juggling, right? And so gaps can come in those wait lists. I would say one that I have encountered over and over and over to my chagrin is then a service will become available. They'll be like, hey, let's schedule. And it's the service that's like an hour and a half. And I'm trying to pick an hour and a half and I'm trying to project, okay, I'm going to pick an hour and a half and hopefully that other wait list, calls me and it's not going to conflict. So those kind of constantly feeling like you are a little bit on quicksand is normal. And again, going back to that parental role, it's somewhat anxiety producing for some of us. Geography is another of the time and space. Invariably, the open spot is not at the closest spot. It's the Murphy's Law of adult services. And so that also can create some transportation and logistics issues. And so the other piece is that adult services are not just lined up perfectly to my work schedule. So there's often these little gaps where my child is going to need care during time that I will need to figure out a plan B. So I want to look at an example, try to bring it to life. So this is Charlie. He is now 22, but he was awfully cute, if I do say so. This was his last week of high school, and this was back in June 2022. And you see this beautiful spreadsheet where the bus comes, and we all know the bus was late sometimes and stuff happened. But mostly I had a big chunk of time that I was able to do other things. So Charlie exits school, and this is the first week after graduation. And if you happen to not be able to see this slide, it is not a thing of beauty. All that green is time that I am on as his caregiver, that there is not someone else. And that if you think I wasn't a little panicked, you would be wrong. So this is what it ended up looking like. So a full 2 years into his adult services, it starts to look like a pretty nice routine, a pretty rigorous schedule, a pretty robust and full life. Those little greens are still me, but that is showing again that things change over time, and just to look for the long haul. You're in this marathon, it will get better. Putting this slide up one more time just to remind everyone again, this is the way life is for everyone. And so just because an individual has a disability doesn't mean they should do one thing and do it in perpetuity. So this is kind of what we want, right? So I wanted to do fall 2025 just to show that it shifted again, just from winter to fall, another revision, if you will. And this one is done with the hopes that it's going to afford Charlie more access to taking college classes in person. So we're going to kind of shift gears, and we're going to start thinking about those gotchas. This is a list of things that I did not fully appreciate when my eldest, and that's Tim at the bottom, he's now 31, when he transitioned out of non-public school about 10 years ago. This is a summary down that center column of all the things that impact everyday life, again, from the position of a family or the perspective of a family. And so just kind of going down, I'm going to comment on a couple. We go from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that kind of coverage that says we take anybody and we have to provide them a free, appropriate public education. And then we exit school, and we have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we in California have Lanterman. Those are nice, but they are not IDEA. That is a different standard. Healthcare. We have pediatricians or pediatric subspecialties that start saying, hey, get ready to transition to adult care. If someone has California Children's Services, they're being told, hey, you have to leave. We are going to exit you. And so there's that transition point of adult providers, and even later, Medicare. Transportation, I've already spoken about. The wide, wide world of MTS, paratransit, hopefully, for some of us, some program transportation, parent driving or ride sharing, or getting creative. Education, again, going from compulsory, full continuum, to families being told, here's all the choices, pick and explore. And it can be a little overwhelming. Decision making, we've talked about. Service providers, this is another little interesting tidbit. Families can be surprised to find out that providers do not have to take their loved one. And most of the vendors, of course, are private entities. Sometimes there's application. It's really more of that, do you fit the model? And less about what we were all kind of used to in school is oh, the model should flex to fit the individual. So there's that kind of shifting in the paradigm. And then last and not least, peer interactions. When we had school, you saw that big chunk of calendar that was that included same age peers. Now we might have work, but that's a very structured, different kind of relationship with peers. School, of course, pretty structured also. So now we have to be kind of more intentional and thoughtful as families, in my opinion, of making those contacts, of keeping up those relationships, of, we still want our child to have meaningful relationships with people that are not related to them. So how do we do that? So these gotchas, my little monsters. And I think of them as like little gremlins that represent friction points of things we didn't know we would need to pay attention to. And hopefully my talking through them will be helping some of you. So, gotchas that come up over and over. One, imperfect information. One tip that I would give to families and to anyone serving families is to encourage folks to treat those resource fairs. And there's one coming up on October 10th down at the San Diego Convention Center. Treat those resource fairs like they are a working event. You're bringing a notebook, you have your pen, you are asking the vendor how that vendor could serve your loved one. You are going home, you're looking at those business cards, you're following up, you're making the connections, you are networking. And for some of us, networking doesn't come super easy, but this is a time to really like treat it like a business, because when you are trying to fill your schedule later, you will want to have a lot of options to pick from. Mandates. Like I said, we move from IDEA over to these more loosey-goosey mandates. They're not as prescriptive, they're not as comprehensive. And guess what? Your child will not be required to obtain those services. So there is some advocacy involved. There is some effort involved. Individualization is a lot different than it was under IDEA. Being able to function in a group, whether it is a group of 3, a group of 6, it opens doors. Now, if your child needs more intensive support, yes, that's available, but it is not quite as easy to walk into. Regional center services for the first time. Maybe you've come to California and you're navigating that. Those timelines can be a little fuzzy around the edges. And so, I just kind of encourage folks to think timelines may not conform to exactly what you find online. Let's see, dispute resolution, as a mediator, one of my favorite topics. Not only are there fewer like promises, but there's fewer options for dispute resolution. Okay. If you have a difference with a vendor or a provider, you are probably the person with the bigger problem. They are probably going to be able to fill that spot. So I guess it's a time to try on kindness, niceness, and flexibility. I think the labor market, everyone knows it's very tight. If you're in school right now and seeing that, oh, the school has some difficulty, recruiting, hiring, retaining staff members, that same market is the one that is also providing the direct support professionals ranks. So from day programs to respite to tailored day to residential staffing, just pack extra patience, extra flexibility. And I guess the other piece that was a gotcha to me over and over is when people don't show up, the backup is often me. And I make it work. So the other thing that I think with the home and community-based service waiver is that there are fewer, not eliminated, but there's fewer kind of single centralized locations for programming. So for families, adjusting expectations that my child is probably going to be in the community for all of their program or their services, that's something to, just kind of start preparing your mindset. And then lastly, you see that parental role. We are demoted, and rightfully, to more of a supporting cast. The focus should be on that newly minted adult. But I will say when it's time to wash the uniform or take someone to the doctor or drive them when the, paratransit doesn't show, that's us. Okay. So here's a couple of exhibits that show some recent gotcha moments. This is all, pretty much in the last 9 months. The one on the left is Charlie now, again, 22. He has a mother who did not necessarily build up some backup plans for transportation. And so he got to miss a program in order to come with his mom to work. So this is him being a good sport on the left. And then On the right, you see my son Tim, and he is looking perfectly delightful. Me, not so much. And I didn't crop myself out because I thought it was a nice little contrast. I had a sleepless night because back 2 days after Christmas, he was placed on a 5150 hold for pretty significant behavior. Um, it was a quick hold. They were like, he doesn't belong here, but this is, who's picking him up? Hello. So, um, I put this on here just to remind us change is the default. Changing is the default. So now we're going into the best part of my talk, hopefully. This is the gems or the good stuff. And this is the good stuff about being an adult. And it is like everyone else in the world. When you're an adult, you have a little more control, a little more choice. And so even more so if families are considering regional centers self-determination program that amps up the control and choice a little bit. I want to focus on dignity of risk, this topic. I'm sure most of you have heard about this. And this is the idea that we don't wrap people in bubble wrap and like not let them get to fail. And so for each of my children, there have been certainly opportunities to have some struggles and have some things that didn't go super great. And so that latitude to pursue interests, to try things, to experience mistakes and missteps and gaffes and errors and all of those words, it does, as a mom, you want to protect, but at the same time, it's really hard to grow if you never get to make a mistake. So, dignity of risk is everyone else's that's not disabled. That's kind of their default. And so I really, like to include this in the GEMS section. It brings to life people's capabilities. It brings to life their personalities. And it gives, when we talk about post-secondary education, the things that are fails, those are part of that education. The impact of past efforts. So as a mom, there are some moments, they don't happen often, I will admit, but there's moments where I glimpse the direct through line of what we did, like from that moment of diagnosis, and then what we advocated for in school, and the things we tried to do for that teenager come to fruition in their adult life. And so I'm trying to think, like, there's been many of them, but when you see like, oh, wow, he just self-advocated. I never thought that was going to happen back when he had a device at age 6 and everything was through the talker. When I could give a number of examples, but I'm going to stay on my timeline. But just being able to sit back and go, wow, those things that I did that didn't feel like they made a difference at the time, boy, like I can see that they made a difference. Going to little league games and like corralling other kids so that this one could do a sport and so these could get to be experienced in the community, like those matter. There's payoff later. And then lastly, I'm trademarking TrueClusion, and that's my version of true inclusion. And my definition of that is the stuff that happens organically when you as a mom or as a dad or as a grandparent or a loved one is not orchestrating it directly for your child. And so whether it is, I'm going to give an example for Charlie, a colleague happened to walk by a place where his art was being featured, and he didn't realize that it was my kids until he went up and was like, hey, is your kid's name, Charlie? I saw his art. And how cool is that, that somebody got to tell me they saw my kid's art out there. I found a Christmas card in Tim's backpack when he came home on a home visit. And I was like, I open up and it says to Tim, and I'm like, how weird, who's writing my son that I don't know about? And I open it up and it's this whole family in a Christmas card. Kids, mom, dad, Christmas tree. And I'm like, where do we get this? So I had to ask him, I'm like, who is this? And he's like, Zumba. And I was like, oh, so he was taking Zumba. His teacher, knew him well enough to write his name on the card and give it to him. And that really touched me just because so many of his relationships are heavily facilitated. Um, when Jack, who I haven't talked a lot about, when his friends from college, like so many of them, flew for the wedding when he got married to his bride, Ashley. Um, that was a true collusion moment when we used to have to like facilitate everything for his to have times with friends. So now for some fun, and this is kind of where are they now? Um, and so I want to say this is Tim. He's 31. He is living a life that is meaningful, albeit intermittently it is really bleeping difficult for him. But um, a couple little highlights. One is he was selected for the Visitor of the Month. This is back before COVID. I didn't even know he was going to the Timken every week on Tuesdays, but he was, and he was enjoying it, and he was making contacts with people in the community. Up in the to the left of the orange triangle, that was him casting his first vote in an election. Again, you can see COVID with the mask. So here is Tim's answer to with whom do I live? Here is his answer to how does he contribute to his community? Here is his answer of what brings me joy and connection. Here is his answer, Zumba, to how is he continuing to learn and develop skills. Here's Jack. And so Jack clearly has a different pathway. He was able to go, he became a physician's assistant. He is currently working with people that are very like his siblings. And he is living a life that's meaningful. And his also can be bleeping challenging. He's paying off loans. He is dealing with really difficult work situations. He is adulting. And he has a very supportive partner. And it's an option, but it's not, like there is not a time that I do not appreciate where Jack is. And this is Charlie. And Charlie is living a life that is meaningful. And he would tell you he has too many seizures. And I would tell you that I am ill prepared for the number of completely normal questions about getting married to his girlfriend. So we're all growing and changing and, navigating what we didn't know we would be worrying about, right? The bottom right is him at his person-centered planning meeting. He was working at the Fleet Science Center. He has a rose behind his ear. I don't know who gave him the rose, but this is another version of a meaningful life. Going to school, very like slowly making progress. He was working. He lost his job recently. He's going to be a volunteer for a little bit while his job renovates the cafe. But entering self-determination, like having that relationship, this is meaningful also. Whoops. And I do not know why. There we go. Practical advice for families. So tip 1 is be willing to try. This is the don't let the perfect be the enemy of something, of access, of action, of good enough. Tip 2, if you're like me, you might have one time said, I will never fill in the blank. Be ready to try something that you thought you would never try. Recruit support. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you have a child that's still in high school, like save up your PTO, like pay off any favors that you owe, like be ready, because when somebody offers you help, please consider taking it. It is a marathon, and especially that first little bit, is an adjustment, and let people help you. Next, it is a small, small world. And I have not always been such a charming individual. So just the more kindness that you can put into the system, I do believe that it comes back. So there's my little tip. If you are like me and there's a reason I have blurred my background because there might be piles of paperwork behind me, don't do what I do better. Level up your paperwork. It will really make things easier because there is a lot of that. For every one of my children, work experience proved more important than what they learned in that classroom, having those skills. So, I have a child that had brain surgery. I promise you that there were things that I did not want him to be in around. I promise you that I was worried. Um, but he would tell me that he can do it. He's not too good for it. So, not too good, not too fragile, not too disabled to learn the value of being part of a group doing something, of contributing to something, and even sweating. Those are all things that he's proud of. And so I share that with you because I was the mom that was like, why are we missing, academics to do this? Because it turned out to be important. Being sure to tap into whatever you need to do to stay regulated, because we're always modeling for our loved ones how to stay regulated. And you're about to need those regulation skills. Keep learning. This is you're here already trying to kind of what do I need to know? There's trainings, workshops, support groups. You are brand new again. Hooray. So if you need ideas, I'm happy to talk about those. Keep moving mountains. You know how to do that. It's just the same thing, only you're older. And then tip 10, and this is one that I continue to have to work at just because my impulse is to give a fast answer. Whenever possible, be that second person to answer. That this is my turn in the passenger seat. And the driver may not be as good a driver as I am, but it's going to be okay. And so we're going to go. People ask what made the biggest impact in my children. So a sample size of 3. Communication strategies. So I'm not saying speech. I'm not saying oral communication. I'm saying ways of communicating are important. Self-advocacy, again, just the ability to make a choice, to say a preference, to let us know when you need help. Cognitive flexibility, and I would say that doesn't just go for the child. It goes for the parent. Emotional regulation, ditto. Social skills, probably ditto. And then I put variety, and that's just a reminder that if you've gotten into kind of a habit, or I don't want to say a rut, but a little complacent about shifting things around, may as well practice because that's what's coming, is a lot of variety. This last slide is of Luke. Luke is my co-director's son. She was supposed to present, wasn't able to, but I wanted this as a kind of a crescendo slide. And the dreams that matter, I know this is a shock, are not the ones that our parents have for us. They are the ones we have for our very own selves. And Luke wanted to be a beer pourer. Luke likes beer. Luke likes sports and concerts. So Luke is a beer pourer at Snapdragon Stadium. If you happen to be there, say hi. But he is having a better life in some ways than his mom, a better life than me maybe sometimes. So just a reminder that there is joy ahead on this journey. Resources that are available, I'm happy to share these if there's something. They're really easy to make, but feel free. And then I always try to send folks to, particularly if you're parenting a Jack-esque person who is, potentially going to go out on his own. These are really excellent recommendations for growing independence. We all spend a lot of time learning how, from the moment we find out we're expecting, oh, what do we do? How do we do this? Nobody tells us how to stop doing this. This is, perhaps one of those kinds of resources. I also love this. This is courtesy of Shasta 21st Century Career Connections. And I haven't found one that I liked better, just to lay out how much everybody else is having to learn and change in those transition years. We have a transition hub. And then this is our contact information. And I will throw my email right into the chat because I can talk and type sometimes. Okay. So if you want any of the slides other than the family pictures, happy to share them. And I am doing great on time. And Jocelyn's back.
Wow, Moira, thank you so much. That was incredible. Those resources, I was like, can I get a copy of those? Those are really fantastic. I wanted to go to the chat here. I think we have a couple comments. Karen wanted to let you know she felt so heartened and encouraged to hear about the many meaningful activities and quality of life that each of your children is experiencing. And I saw that too. I was really impressed by the different activities, but also the different like meanings in life that your kids have figured out for themselves. That's really powerful.
Thanks, Karen.
Karen also had a question. So if anybody else has questions for Moira while I'm reading this one, please go ahead and pop those into the Q&A at the bottom. We'll also provide Moira's email address. She has it here for you, but we'll send it along in the follow-up as well if anybody would like that. So Karen said, I'm interested in learning more about resources that could perhaps be available while my son is still in high school, specifically job training and independent living skills and supports.
So I'm going to start with the job training question. So there is, each school has kind of their own way of doing vocational training. Your child is eligible for, if they're 16 years old and they identify as having a disability, it is a pretty easy to coast over bar for Department of Rehabilitation Student Services. And I can drop that in the chat in a minute when I'm listening to the next question. And then the idea of independent living is a little more, I'm going to say, thorny. Some youngsters, when they're still going through their IEP, do have goals that are highly like in that independent living area. Other schools or IEP teams may be a little leery of putting some of the more practical goals into the IEP. The trick is that Regional Center starts to fund what's called Independent Living Services, ILS. I believe they start funding that at age 18. I will double check and drop that also into the chat. Digging through papers to make notes to myself. But that is probably the closest thing. Some of us have used occupational therapy as like clinical occupational therapy, meaning through our insurance to address some of those, activities of daily living that we're like, well, we still need to work on shoe tying or, some swallowing skills, things like that. But typically that, brushing teeth, shaving, kind of self-care, working on being able to recognize my medication is running low, I need to order a refill, all of those kind of like independent living, that's typically a regional center kind of service, and it typically is not easily accessed before that point of transition. But I will drop a couple things in the chat.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Moira? I'm checking our chat. Okay. Like I said, if anybody does have questions, we've got her email here. I want to thank you so much for being here with us today, Moira. That was an amazing presentation, a lot of really wonderful resources, and the way you tied your story throughout really, really was impactful. For everybody else who's on the call today, thank you for joining us. We will have our next Navigating Change Lunch and Learn series on November 4th at noon. You can sign up. We will send that link along to you in your after webinar email today. Otherwise, thank you all for being here today, and we hope to see you again soon.
And there's resources in the chat.
Thank you so much.
No
Bye,
problem.
everyone.
Bye. Thanks for coming.